Judge was shocked. As she stands in front of the court, tears stream down her face as she confesses a surprising secret about her adoptive father that would leave everyone in a state of disbelief. She was brought to court after her adoptive father, who had previously been denied custody of her, demanded a second chance to take responsibility for her. It was at this moment that the judge asked the small girl a simple question, the answer to which left everyone in the room speechless and unable to take their tongues out of their mouths for the rest of the afternoon. The wonderful story began when George, the owner of a well-known network of furniture stores, chose to unite his life with Jessica, a young university student whom he had met in an exhibition of her wares in a shopping mall. It was the beginning of a beautiful chapter in their lives. His family was opposed to the relationship because they believe that this young girl, who was 10 years younger than him, was only interested in his money. Despite this, he continued the relationship despite the objections of his family. The 35-year-old man couldn't care less about what others thought of her, since he was head over heels in love with her and convinced that she felt the same way about him. They moved into their new home after spending their honeymoon on a tropical location, and George gradually became more certain that he had made the best decision of his life during this period. After a few months, Jessica agreed to George's proposition to become a mother, citing the great conclusion of their relationship as a justification. Jessica's biggest aim was to become a mother, and George wanted to help her realize her dream. Even though she didn't appear to be really interested in becoming a parent at first, she eventually consented to give it a try at her own prodding. When they realized that time had passed and they were still unable to conceive, they sought the assistance of a fertility doctor, and it was at this point that George heard the sad news that would forever alter his life and the course of his family. The reason for this was because he was suffering from cancer, which was the reason why he had been unable to conceive a child with his wife. His uncertainty over whether he would be able to overcome his anguish or whether he would grow even older as a result of Jessica's seeming indifference to Jessica's condition of health accompanied him throughout that horrible time. To be more specific, she has done everything but support him, which includes not attending him to his chemotherapy appointments, among other things. In his honor, she has done little more than spend money on merchandise and attend parties with his buddies. George was able to overcome his illness as a result of the efforts of the doctors and his unwavering faith, despite the horrific side effects of the treatment. Unfortunately, as a result of his therapy, he's been rendered infertile for the rest of his life. You shouldn't make such a big deal out of it. Keep in mind the positive features of the current scenario. As a result, you'll be able to concentrate all of your available time and resources to us, as well as the success of your business. As an added bonus, you'll save me the misery of witnessing my body to form in order to bring a whiny child into my life and ruin it. Perhaps if these circumstances had a substantial influence on you, we could adopt you and take care of the problem for you. His girlfriend, Jessica, suggested to him one night, when he was feeling particularly depressed, that he should show regret for having his dream cut short in this manner. She hadn't even given it a second thought up to that point in her life. Furthermore, even though he first assumed that adopting a kid would leave him feeling less fulfilled than raising a child from his own blood, he was proven wrong by the experience. After circling about in his mind for a while, he finally had the confidence to pay a visit to one of the adoption centers in the city, and it was at that point that he met tiny Anna Lucia, an endearing but despondent little girl who had only recently arrived at the facility and had not seen a single word since her arrival. George couldn't help but be saddened by her story because he was aware of the unfortunate circumstances behind her removal to that facility for social safety. She was acquainted with her parents for the first time in her life, and she had even lived with them for a short period of time before custody of her was taken away from them both. However, after being accused by several of her neighbors, it was discovered that they had mistreated the little girl, who was in a terrible state of malnutrition, and that they had forced her to beg on the streets in order to spend the money she earned on illegal substances. Due to the extreme trauma she had experienced, she was unable to communicate and was terrified of coming into contact with anyone. She was eventually able to recuperate. No matter how many times she said no, George continued to see her on a regular basis and worked his way up to her acceptance by being patient, courteous, and extremely delicate in his approach. Assisted by her efforts, the poor little girl, who did nothing but scream, quiver, and hide from everyone, was gradually assimilating into the rest of the group after a few months. She was no different than any other young girl her age in terms of playing, conversing, and smiling. As she was even more beautiful. She was adored by George, who treated her as if he had fathered her, as a result of the profound bond of paternal love that had grown between her and him over the time, and it was for this reason that he decided to go through with the adoption procedure and bring her into his family, where she would live alongside him and his wife as well. This is the first time the man has ever felt such happiness in his life. As soon as he saw her little child, he dedicated himself, body and soul, to caring for her and showering her with all the love that her real parents had denied her and her brothers. Jessica, who was still behaving like a teenager, initially pretended to accept and be courteous to her new daughter, but she quickly realized that she'd been duped and realized she'd been duped. With her eyes fixed on George's adoration for her and believing that the little girl posed an existential threat to the goals she'd set for herself, which included retaining control of all her husband's assets, she developed a jealous and aggressive attitude toward the girl, complaining that George was no longer treating her with the respect she deserved. Since he'd brought that intruder Brad into their family, she eventually ended up trying to kill the little girl. George exclaimed in wrath, demanding that she delete her words and informing her that should she continue to be abused, his daughter in the manner, he would have no choice but to seek a divorce and return the girl to live with her parents. After hearing this, Jessica grew outraged and attempted to stab the young lady in the stomach with a knife one night while she was sleeping. However, despite her inability to scream, she did manage to reach out for help, and George arrived just in time to save her life. On the other hand, You've Gone Nuts, whose response to Jessica's screams was to grab the knife and yank it away from her. The woman, instead of calming down, began to yell at him and stir up a commotion, which resulted in the neighbors being aware of the situation and alerting the authorities. In response to the arrival of the police, Jessica accused George of hitting her. The custody of Anna Lucci was taken away from the couple, as was to be expected, in order to protect Anna Lucia, who was unable to stop crying. The cops detained her and took her to jail while they performed their investigation. The investigations revealed that Jessica had lied, and as a result, he was released. While Jessica was charged with attempted murder and condemned to prison with an unwavering determination to win back parental responsibility for his daughter, he reached out to the judge who had taken custody away from him in order to submit an appeal against his decision. It didn't appear that the elderly gentleman was persuaded by the fact that he had been declared not guilty and that the woman had already been sentenced to prison time. George was tenacious in his request, and as the case was eventually reopened in his favor, bring the girl into the courtroom. The judge commanded, "Bring the young lady in." Afterwards, Anna Lucia stepped timidly up to the front of the courtroom with her voice quivering and tears in her eyes as she spoke in Spanish. In response to the judge's question about whether the young girl wanted to go home with her father, "Mr. George," the young girl stated, "He's not my father." The judge explained everyone was in agreement after hearing her speak out about what they needed to do next. But then Anna screamed again, this time drowning out all the mutterings in the process. To me, he is a superhero because he's the only person who has ever loved and protected me in a way that no one else has ever been able to do before. Despite the fact that he's not my biological father, I regard him as such. In that case, yeah, I do desire a reunion with him simply because well-being by his side makes me feel happy and comfortable. Her speech brought the audience to tears and they rushed to embrace her as soon as she finished. George was among many who were moved to cheers and ran to embrace the speaker as she finished her sentence. On the same day, they returned together to their respective homes, demonstrating to the world that meaningful relationships are not built through blood, but rather through the love that connects our hearts together. This has been our story for the day. I sincerely hope that you found it to your satisfaction. It's important to remember that I publish new content frequently, so be sure to switch on the notification bell so that you're always alerted to new tales like this one.